Welcome to Creative Tien channel. Today I want to talk about Entrelac knitting and how to do a simplified version on a knitting machine. So what is an Entrelac? It's basically a basket weave pattern. If you look at example here, we can see it's made of different layers. And this can be done with hand knitting or machine knitting. There's a proper way to do it. You cast down from the bottom and do the first layer of the triangle and pick up stitch and continue the second layer. I really like the final texture of the Entrelac, but I think the technique is getting too complicated or kind of tedious. So I'm just trying to find a simplified way and make it look like Entrelac without complicated techniques. So my idea is just to knit the squares in the center individually and seam it up later. It's kind of like crocheting the granny square or modular knitting. You knit up separate pieces and put it together later. This way you don't have to think about the complicated construction. Once you lay out the design, you can just figure out the individual piece and seam up later. So let's look at the basic construction. There are 4 squares in the middle and a half square or the triangles on the sides. And basically it's just made of these 2 patterns. One is the square, the other one is half of the square, that's a triangle. And you can make it as long as you like or as small as you like, as long as you keep the outside the same. And for each layer, the square is slanted in different directions. So first layer is this direction, and the second layer is the opposite direction. So that's the basic construction of the Entrelac. And because we can knit quickly with a knitting machine, this can be a practical idea to use as a blanket or a scarf. I'm going to use the stockinette stitch on my LK150. The first thing is to make sure you can create a square. So you just have to do a few samples and see how many stitches and how many rows to create a square you like. Because every yarn is different and every tension, every machine is slightly different. So it's better to do a few samples and find the row count and the stitch count you like for the square and also for the triangle. And we all know that the knitting stitch is more squished, more flat. So if you want to make a square, you need more rows than the stitch numbers. So for my square, I have 20 stitches and 26 rows. And I have it on my tension 6 for the carriage and tension 5 for my upper mast tension. The yarn I'm using is a Lion brand mandala yarn. It keeps changing color in bigger sections. So this is good for making blankets. And this is the category 3, so it's more like a DK weight yarn. And if your yarn change color like this one, you have to be planning your direction first. And we can start from the bottom, the first 3 triangles, and then go to the next row. That's in a different direction. So it will be 1 triangle, 2 square, and 1 triangle, and then the 3rd row. But if you have solid color, it doesn't matter. You can knit all the square first or all the triangles first. So that's something to think about. For the square, it's pretty basic. I just do the standard stockinette stitch. I use E-rub cast on and knit about 25 or 26 rows and then bind it off. and I'll check my pattern, see how many square I need. If you are not using color changing yarn like this, you can knead all the square first and knead all the triangles at the same time. If you look at this chart, you will notice all the triangles are the same. They all lean to one direction. It's the same throughout. So that makes things very simple. And here is my sample. Basically, I knead it this way. I start with 20 stitches and decrease on one side to make the slope. And I'm using the full fashion decrease with a 3-prong transferring tool. That's why it has that edge. And it actually makes the edge kind of solid. It doesn't curl much. So even if you don't put extra edging, it's still okay. So I cast down 20 stitches and I'm going to do leaning towards that direction. And if you want to lean toward the other direction, you just decrease from a different side. For now, I'm going to decrease on the right side. It seems just easier for me. So I'm going to start with knitting first row and handsome weight. And I'm going to use my 3-prong transferring tool and starting from the right side, just to move one stitch over. And the decreased stitch should be back to the A position for the non-working position, so we don't knit it by accident. And for the passes, we are going to alternate between 1 and 2 passes. Because if I do 2 passes between each decrease, the piece will get too long. So I'm going to alternate 1 pass and 2 pass. For this one, I'm going to start with 1 pass. And now I'm going to decrease again and have 2 passes. Just 1 stitch over. Put the empty needle back. And we have 2 passes now. Sometimes the edge stitch doesn't knit very well. We can adjust by hand. And now we will decrease one more time. Move 1 stitch over. And then just 1 pass this time. So we keep alternating decrease and then knit 1 row or knit 2 rows until the end. Now I have 3 stitches. I'm going to reduce it to 2 stitches and just bind off because I don't want a very sharp edge for just 1 stitch. So now I can just bind off. Now I can cut the yarn and take it off the machine. Now we just finish 1 triangle. Now I will just go ahead and knit all the squares and triangles and try to assemble them. Here is the part of the Entrelac pattern. I have the first square in this direction, and the first layer of triangle is in the opposite direction. And this is the same triangle as this, but in a different position. The second square will be opposite direction from that, After we assemble all of them, it will start to make sense. Next time I will assemble all the squares and triangles and make them into a blanket. Thank you for watching and talk to you next week.